Thanks for tuning in to Gin and Tantra, spirituality with a twist. As you can see the flex on the video. Um, yeah, today we have Daniel driving the ship again. Daniel drives the ship quite a bit because I have a license to drive, which is great. It is illegal, however, in every state. So we fly it in the sky. And today we have with us one familiar face to me, but a new face to everybody else, a contributor to our Gin and Tantra project here, one Jonathan DOmoleczny. Oh, that's right. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he is my brother. And so if this conversation seems familiar, it's because I've known him his whole life, not my whole life, his whole life. So I've been free for a couple of years. But John, thanks for coming on, man.
I'm excited to be here. I feel like this has been maybe a conversation in the works for a long, long time now. So it's really cool to be with you and be contributing and hopefully sharing some value today. Hopefully sharing some insight, value to your viewers and listeners and audience. And I'm just kind of excited to be here and have a chat with you.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And speaking of listeners and audience and viewers, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, or forget liking and commenting. Just subscribe, whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple or wherever you are. Hit that thing. It's free to you. I know you hear it all the time from different people all over wherever you listen, and it's because it's important. It moves us up in the algorithm. It gets us seen by different people, and then we can have on different guests and increase our reach and get different opinions from different folks. We do get information, questions, comments, things like this from our audience. So, yeah, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. So, I wanted to bring John on as a regular contributor because he has, and I'll let him speak for himself, but he has been going through, sort of a metamorphosis in his own life, which I have been able to be a part of, and he has a brilliant mind, if I could say, and has come up with some kind of very practical ways in which we can work on our relationship with ourselves. And so, if that kind of thing is for you, stick around. If that kind of thing is not for you, then by all means, scroll away. So, without any further ado, John's going to give a little bit of a background to himself and kind of how he got here. And then we'll get into more of his very clear and I could say even logical ways really system of working with yourself and I could say specifically through difficult times is this kind of how I pull what you have put together. So I'm excited to get into that. I'm excited to share this with people and yeah, take it away.
Yeah. So this, so how I've arrived here has been, to your point, a real journey. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in what I think we would call the physical human realm of corporate world and the daily grind and the grind that so many of us go through.
Mm,
And that inherently has caused, some reflection, especially in the last couple of years as I approached 40, just thinking about, what is life, what is purpose, what is meaning. And so yeah, I think I came to a real inflection point in my life where there was just a lot of introspection. Um, I think as my brother and somebody I grew up with, I think this imagery will probably resonate for you. It's a memory that we share. Um, we used to go out to a Mexican restaurant with my dad pretty often. And at the end, we would always ask our dad for some pennies so that we can go throw them in the wishing well.
yeah.
Of course, you remember this. And I think that imagery is really important because I think we spend a lot of our time living our lives that way. We throw pennies or rocks into a well, hoping and wishing, and the energy of that ripple that we throw the coin into is a energy that we hope comes and impacts us. So I want the job. I throw a rock in or a coin in. I want the house. I want the family. And we're constantly outsourcing our happiness and forgetting about ourselves, forgetting about who we are, what's important to us. And so really over the last few years, I've really started to shift energetically in thinking about becoming the rock or becoming the coin myself. And as I become that, then I can ripple out and make impact on others.
Mm.
And so it's just a shift in mindset. And I love that imagery. I love the imagery of coming back to oneself, because when we are whole, then we can really help others and allow our energy to have influence on their lives rather
So
than,
it's interesting. Um, in the Tibetan tradition, they'll call those things like throwing wishes or throwing desires, throwing wants, something like this. And they'll often do it at night before you go to bed when you're practicing a dream yoga. If you don't have it's not easy to practice. It's super subtle. You have to have these images in your mind before you go to sleep, and then when you sleep, you're supposed to see it, and then when you see it, then you wake up in your dream, and now you can exist in this dream. Okay, fine. But there is another way of doing it where you sort of like you're talking about throwing a penny into a wishing well, and you just have the thought in your dream in your mind before you go to bed, I would like to arise in my dream tonight. And so like you're saying, you're sort of I like this term, like you're outsourcing your happiness. And that kind of that it gets started in that way. And additionally, putting a wish, incanting, right? This is incantation. This is a shamanic practice, right? Or we could say like, it's witchcraft, if you will, because what do you do? We do it all the time in this culture, and I don't mean to tangent, but I just think it's very fascinating because it's igniting things for me. So, what do we do every year for our birthday? We make a wish. Other traditions have things around New Year's, right, where you make a wish. We have these things called intentions. What are they? They're wishes, right? So, and then essentially, what is thoughts and prayers? I know it's bullshit that I don't want to say it, but many people use for tragedies, right? Those are essentially our wishes, So even though this culture is a quote unquote scientifically proven culture, we still end up using a lot of these kind of divination practices, and I like the sort of parallels with that in terms of your own kind of your own happiness, your own desires, you sort of cast off and say, okay, well, I hope that I can do this. So I'm interested to see where you take this.
yeah. And I pull a lot of inspiration from a lot of different places, but heavily, Wayne Dyer, from Alan Watts. And Alan talks about, when we are not whole and happy in our own world, then even when we achieve what it is that we're looking to achieve, um, that we'll never be happy once we even achieve it at all. So
Correct.
I don't think there's anything wrong with having goals. I don't think
Right.
there's anything wrong with having wishes. But until you're in the present with yourself and content with your own world, it's impossible, in fact, to find joy and meaning, if you're so detached and dissociated from your own self. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'll share a bit about my story, and so how I came to this point. Um, I think for years myself, I spent a lot of time moving and
Moving how?
seek, seeking. So moving physically,
Mm.
relocating to different places, looking for new roles, looking for new lifestyles, looking for new career paths, looking for the next thing. So, of course, we grew up together in Chicago. We had our own journeys along the pathway, as I'm sure you've shared with your audience before. Um, but I left Chicago to California. I came back to Chicago, went back to California, San Francisco specifically, went to Sacramento, went up to Seattle. I'm now down in Charleston. And along that path, and it was always this quest for, throwing the penny of, well, if I go here, then I can have this. I can have this job title. I can make this money. I can, seek this thing, that I'm looking for happiness. and never really finding that within myself. So always outsourcing, just always outsourcing. And as you'll find, wherever you go, there you are, right? So you're always going to inevitably come up against yourself. So along that path, I was really blessed. Like I found what I think was success. I found career growth. I had this great career trajectory. Growing every couple of years, grew into a junior executive level role, which I was so proud of. And along every step of that path, it would be like, I have this achievement, but there's still like this void. There's still this emptiness within it. Um, and so throughout the years, there was always this overarching dream of like having a home. We grew up moving around a lot. We didn't really have a home necessarily. We rented in apartments, and there was just never this stability that we felt. And that was kind of the big dream. And finding myself here in Charleston now, I finally put myself in this financial position to buy a home. And as I did, and that happened in 2023, and as I did, there was this emptiness that came with it. It was like, okay, well, now what?
Mm.
Now I've realized this dream, and it felt like crossing this finish line. It was like 10 years in the making of saving and working hard and all the things, only to find this real like emptiness within it. You think, oh, once I get there, once I achieve this dream that I have, that everything's going to be perfect, everything's going to be great. And as I suggested, wherever you go, there you are. And that's kind of where I found myself, was in this place of, now what? Now there's still this emptiness within me. So
This is kind of, well, this is very specifically again talked about in Buddhism, that all desires are empty of intrinsic nature.
mm,
Right. Everything essentially is empty of intrinsic nature. This is referred to as emptiness, or maybe we could better say interconnectivity. But what you're talking about is a relative sense of emptiness, as in there is no thing behind the thing. So as you want something, you work for it, and that's good. It moves you, it motivates you, you have a purpose, so on and so forth, a quote unquote purpose. But then when you achieve that thing, there is no thing behind the thing. So, yes, you work so hard for the house, but the idea of the house that resided in your mind had a larger place in your life than the actual physical thing of the house had in your life.
mm,
And once you get the thing, it usually inverts. So, oh my God, if I could just get this thing or whatever, this car, this job, whatever. Then, if this, then that. And that is I'm kind of calling it this now, algorithmic thinking, because that's how you program algorithms. If this happens, then these things happen. And that's how you build decision trees, right? And you stack all those together, then you can have something that, appears to be intelligent. I mean, it is sort of making decisions, but it's not actively deciding for itself. I'm sure AI people would, disagree, but, whatever. It's my podcast. Suck it. Um, you know, and so there's this deep kind of acceptance that when you reach the end point, that there will be a carrot. There'll be something there for you that you have been searching for, for quite some time, or that you have been wanting. That's probably better put, wanting. And then you get it, and yeah, it's great for a minute. And then the reality sets in, and I'm going to use a quote from my yoga teacher, Andre: everything that you own eventually owns you.
mm,
And so, yes, you have this, lovely place that you can call your own. And, now you're paying the mortgage and the tax and the HOAs and the electric and the roof and and that. And then now you're working. So first you were working to get it. Now you're working to maintain it.
mm.
You're just working, you're dancing around this thing over and over and over again. And this is not common to you. This is common to everybody,
Everybody.
the common to everybody around everything, cars, all the material things, and don't get me wrong, material things are nice and we should enjoy them, because if we're going to work so much, we should at least like the thing that we're getting, for sure. So I'm not shitting on it, but I'm also saying, like, it's not the end all. It really isn't the end all, because then we begin to identify with the things that we have forgetting the fact that those things are not us. Those things are external things. And like you said it earlier, if you outsource your happiness, then things have to make you happy. And I want to underline, I know this will probably come up when we do the editing in the video. If we make a little clip of this, I want to try and underline things make you happy. Why do you
Mm.
have to be made happy? Well, it's because intrinsically, for the most people, we're not. And so, therefore, things have to make you happy. So, you search for happiness externally, right? Like you said, throwing the penny in the wishing well or throwing the stone into the universe, hoping that something happens from a ripple like a boomerang when it comes back and gets you. And now the ripple hits you and you're made happy. But what happens before you were made happy? You weren't. It's inherent in the language that we use. You know what I'm saying? So there's a big difference between establishing a relationship with yourself that you feel contented by, and there's a place of peace and acceptance and happiness that is in there, versus a place of malcontentedness that requires external sources of mediation in order to facilitate your happiness and well-being.
Isn't that fascinating? Like you live in a beautiful community, and I'm blessed to live in a beautiful community too, where there's some affluence and folks work so hard to get to
Yeah.
where they're going. And then it's like you would sort of have this expectation of like, oh, I've gotten here, I've arrived. And it's like, and you have to work exponentially harder to keep it all together.
Hmm.
Oh, I finally got the BMW, I finally got the Mercedes, and okay, now I got to pay for that every day. Now I got
Each
to
and every
prop
day.
this up. Right. And now I finally got that home, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million home. Okay, well now you got to keep that going,
Hmm.
paying that mortgage. And like I think I think sometimes we forget about the efforting that goes into that. Like it's a real efforting that happens, and I pull from Taoist influence just like yourself, and talking about just thinking about riding the energy, letting things flow as they should, that, the streams flow into the ocean, and, you
Hmm.
know, giving up and surrendering and stopping the efforting, I think is
Hmm.
it's been a big theme in my life now. It's just kind of letting those things go, letting the efforting go, and just being okay with all of the things, the ups and the downs, and not trying to force everything the way that I want it. So I think that's a really interesting point that you make. Yeah, I think as I finally achieved this goal for myself, like I was saying, I there was this void though. There was this void within it. And it took a great pain, in fact, to then get to this sort of growth, this place of growth. It was almost like having to chop off your hand to realize how grateful you are to have a hand.
Hmm.
Is sort of how my life unraveled a bit. I made some decisions and choices in my life that some might argue are, weren't necessarily the right decisions, that caused some of my own challenges in my own world, but had to give up all the things that I had worked hard for. I had to give up my home. I had to give up the lifestyle that I had built. Um, I got laid off from my job in a workforce reduction. Like there was all these things that happened in this very short amount of time, and it really forced me to be introspective and reflect, a bit more reflective, and thinking about what is this? Like, what am I actually doing here? And that was it. You and I talked about this. The imagery that you conjured up was, it's like being in the well. And you and I talked about that quite a bit, that you spend this time in the well. And but within there, when you're down deep in that well, like there are gems and nuggets to be found. There is truth and gold. So like, yeah, you're in this deep, dark place, but there's also things to be found there. And that was the case for me. I think the imagery that came for me, and ultimately led me to where, why I'm here today with you, the imagery was more like being in a desert for me. It felt like being in this desert. And I can remember some months ago feeling like I am happy to do the walking to get out of this desert, but I just need guidance. Like I just need to know, do I need to go north, south, east, west? Like I just need some guidance on which direction to go. Um, and I felt very stuck in that space. And then ultimately, like one day I decided I'm just gonna sit here. I'm just gonna sit.
Mm.
Um, both in the literal sense, as much as the meditative sense. I really found meditation and found this inward sense of self, where I started to then really dig deep within. And basically through a series of synchronicities, um, I began writing. I began looking for beauty in everything. I began, getting up early and going to the beach for sunrises and long walks, looking at people differently and entering conversations differently, finding love and beauty in everything. And it led me to this space. Like I remember very distinctly the moment that I found what I found. I would sit in a coffee shop every Sunday morning and I would write. I would journal and I would write. And out of absolutely nowhere, I received this inspiration. Um, and it's called STEPS. It's an acronym. And it was my practical guide on how do I get back to myself and what is important to me, and how do I begin to build my own life back up,
Mm.
from where I had been. So STEPS, the acronym, they're in no real order except for the last one. So the first four buckets sort of lead to bucket number five. Um, and so it is social, filling my social bucket. That is spending time with loved ones, family members, friends, romantic partners, but having things on my social calendar, um, that are both not just of filling time, but also of value. Really finding time to enjoy others and listen and learn from others. So I began attending lots of different things, just experiencing. I wanted to experience new social environments that I had never been to. So, meditations and yoga classes and men's groups, and thrusting myself into these spaces that would be uncomfortable for me. And that was great. Like I met a lot of new people and experienced a lot of new things.
So at the so we just did an episode, myself and Katie Peterson, one of our other contributors, on grief, or we're doing a series on grief and grief and relationships. We just finished the grief portion, so if audience, if you're interested in that, then you can check that out. But one of the things that we talked about, because there's like the five stages of grieving, right? Denial and repression and acceptance and bargaining, anger, and then the last one is kind of they call it, the one. It's not one of those five, but it's an addendum. It's called finding meaning. And
Mm,
one of the pieces that I took away from the research around that episode was that you are not filling in the void that was created by loss. And so what you're talking about, all this change can be perceived as a loss, right? You said, I lost my home, I lost my job.
mm,
So there's this loss. So you have to go through that grieving process. And one of the ways in which that we come out of it, you work through grief, is through finding meaning. And one of the aspects of finding meaning is having strong social connections, having strong, relationships. And what relationships do is relationships fill the space around that void. It doesn't ever fully cover it. There's always a little space in there where that void was and will be, because it should be honored as a place that was held by something, right? But that in one of the ways in which that you can work with that, is by interacting socially, by having connection. And so I wanted to just talk about that, as this was born essentially out of a grieving process, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I think Eastern philosophy and the Taoist perspective would suggest that it is the emptiness that that gives us meaning, right? It is not the window itself that is important. It is the space within the window to see
Correct.
through.
Yeah.
It's not the vase itself that is of importance. It's the space within that we can and hold things. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's, just off on a tangent a little bit, but I think it's relevant here that it's a shift in mindset to thinking about voids and what would regularly be thought of as negativity as maybe something more positive or essential.
Sure.
Um,
So the first one is the social. So
that's right.
steps, STEPS. Okay, so first one is social. What's the
Yeah.
next one?
So the next one is technical. It's investing in yourself from a professional or learning perspective, building oneself. So continuing to invest, whether it's continued professional development, maybe that's adding, a certificate, going back to graduate school. But it can also be something as simple as just getting better at what it is that you do, learning. It's that constant reinvestment in oneself, um, and getting better at what you do from a professional perspective. And I'll circle back to the idea of professional because I think so many of us, and I think maybe your audience will resonate with this, is that, well, I'm not doing the things that I want, that I love doing. This is not exactly what I set out to do with my life. I didn't want to sit in an office space. And we'll sort of dig into that a little bit. But
Yeah,
in
but you
any
can also
case,
say, like, a hobby, a skill,
right,
right? So
correct.
anything that requires development, that you have to learn something, an instrument or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep. The E is emotional. Um, and that's dealing with one's own psychology. And I think of psychology as a biological process. It's not such an abstract thing. Like it just what we're built to do biologically. So I spent a lot of time in therapy. I ran from therapy for a while. Um, and I found I actually came to really enjoy it. It was great to just kind of hear my own thoughts and work through my own challenges.
Oh,
And
human beings love the sound of their own voice.
oh, of course we do. Yeah. Here we are, aren't we?
Oh yeah, man, you think I don't know? Come on, man. I call it. It's all good.
Yeah, but I think it's really important that we heal our mind a bit, that we
Absolutely.
spend time visiting our own traumas, our challenges, and sometimes what I found in therapy, yes, like it was nice to have a therapist and work with somebody who
Yeah.
provided guidance and perspective, but I also found that it was nice to just vocalize my own thoughts and hear them out loud. And
Sure.
sometimes when you hear them out loud for yourself, you're like,
Yeah.
well, this sounds ridiculous,
Yeah.
or boy, I can't believe I'm actually saying this. This sounds foolish. And so therefore, like changes need to happen.
Yeah.
Um, but I found that working through therapy was very enriching to my life. But there's lots of other things. We can read books, we can engage with loved ones, we can journal. There's lots of different ways to think about impacting our emotional state of being. It's not just purely therapy. There's lots of
No.
different
Well,
modalities there.
you're talking about things that have therapeutic value,
Correct.
right? Things that have therapeutic value specifically on the emotional aspect, right? So you want to address that portion of it. All right, so that's the emotional aspect.
Yep. The P is physical. dealing with one's physical well-being. And this is something you and I know very well. For me, fitness, I'm so thankful. Like I already had this as a backbone for me, but for some people they don't. And
Hmm.
physical exercise changes us fundamentally in both how we feel day to day, just our energy levels, um, and our own health and well-being, but it also changes us cognitively. It changes our perspective. I get up every day and I train 6 a.m. And I think about it, I'm like, I've already done the hardest shit I have to do today. And the rest of the day, therefore, is just a little bit easier. I've gotten up and it just gives me that edge. It gives me that mental boost, but also the energetic boost that I need. So I think that can be very transformative is dealing with one's physical well-being. That's exercise, that's nutrition, that's flexibility, that's relaxation, spending time. Daniel, as you know, like that's been a theme for me that I need in my life. So maybe that I had the exercise component, but I didn't always have the rest and relaxation that I needed. So that's equally important too. The sleep, the rest, those things are very important. And the last bucket here is kind of the big one. And I feel like having those first four really builds to the final S, which is the spiritual. Um, and sort of that's kind of at the top of this pyramid. I feel like once we've really dealt with our human experience, we can then sort of transcend into this higher space, this higher energy, if you will, of self actualization, and start to think more expansively about purpose and who am I and what is it that I'm doing here, and really fundamentally and philosophically examining and questioning this whole thing that we are in. And I know that's where this podcast and you spend so much time in, but I feel like until we really get this foundational position of dealing with our physical self, it's hard to elevate into that space. So those are the really the 5 steps of coming back to oneself and finding happiness and joy and love. And this has served me so well. This practical guide. What I find is that I feel like if I just fill these buckets up enough, and if I just put some focus into each one, I feel very whole and very complete. And I feel like then I then find the sense of satisfaction that I can be in the present moment at any given time and feel like my happiest, best self. So that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm here sharing today.
Yeah, this really, and as we kind of come to the end of our time here, I really, we'll be free here. I really feel like this would be very appropriate for people working through a grieving stage. That this would
Mm,
be the tail end of one's grieving stage. So I know that there's this finding meaning portion, on the 5 stages of grief, and then there's a finding meaning. But I feel like this is a practical aspect or a practical guide to working through grief.
yeah.
Like once you have you've done some bereavement, that this can kind of take the next turn, if you will. Begin to focus yourself back on yourself, not as a means of ignoring the external situation, but as a means of you know, alchemizing all of the kind of I don't know how you want to call it, like variables that are existing within yourself, the what ifs, the whys, the questions, the hows, all these questions, and then moving them into a place of action or non-action in some of them, but you are taking all of them and running them in through your kind of own filtration, your own digestive process, and coming out the other side with something that would yield you possibility for an integrated experience and integrating what you went through just previously. And so, in a sense, it's honoring what happened by causing you to go through this process and then coming out the other side, sort of an upgraded version, if you will, of yourself, taking into account what you learned in the short run from doing all of these things, but then also pulling through that experience of grief or griefs as the thread that ties all of these things together, and that can reside within you as an aspect of who you are now, so that that thing that occurred is no longer the chunk that is missing from your leg, but it is the skin that was removed from your glute to cover the burn that was on your chest. And so you are a reintegrated or resyntheticized being.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great summation. And I think I think my focus is really like, I know often, we have these deep conversations, you and I know on the podcast you have these great depth of conversation around, you know, Buddhist philosophy, and we go really deep on so many different things. But I think for me, I really I feel like that my space is to give somebody something very accessible,
Mhm.
something very tangible that is very easy to access, doesn't require a whole lot of thought, and that folks can just pull from pretty readily. So
Yeah.
I think that has been my calling. Again, this served me, and I feel like my job now, my focus and purpose is to try to serve others, and bring a little bit of light. It's not a cure all, fix all, but I feel like if I can bring a little bit of light into folks' lives, then I've done some
Yeah,
real good
you've
here.
had some value. You bring some
Yeah.
value. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was great getting to break this down with you here today, John. We'll as we record continuously now over the next however many months, we'll get further into the kind of like the technicals, the practical pieces of each of these. That's my hope, anyways, and yeah, can provide that for folks. So if anybody has any questions about any of this, please feel free to hit us up at jinandtantra@gmail.com. As always, subscribe to our work. We definitely appreciate it. Share it. It definitely helps us to grow and to reach more people, which ultimately is the goal. We are not monetized or, anything else like this. So this is just a passion project because we are passionate people and like to share things that have had, value for us. And then if they have value for others, and that just, multiplies the givingness that we believe that we have received from our own life experience. So thanks for coming on today, John, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here again with you because I think our relationship will start to show. I think you and I, we do a lot
It's
of laughing and have a lot of fun. So
It'll
I
start
think
to rear its ugly head. Yes.
oh yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
All right, well, for Jonathan, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.